Welcome to Untold Stories of Freddie Mercury. If this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And now, let's dive into today's unforgettable story. The summer of 1986 was supposed to be just another chapter in Queen's legendary touring history. The Magic Tour had been breaking records across Europe, with Freddie Mercury commanding stages like the theatrical emperor he had always been destined to become. But on that humid July evening at Wembley Stadium in London, something extraordinary was about to unfold that would transcend music, fame, and everything the world thought it knew about the man behind the mustache. 86,000 people had gathered under the darkening English sky, their voices already hoarse from singing along to the opening acts. The anticipation was electric, crackling through the massive crowd like lightning before a storm. Banners waved in the gentle breeze, displaying messages of love in dozens of languages, while camera flashes created a constellation of light across the stadium floor. This was more than a concert. It was a pilgrimage for those who had traveled from every corner of the globe to witness Queen in their absolute prime. Behind the towering stage setup, Freddie stood in his dressing room, applying the final touches of his pre-show ritual. His reflection stared back from the mirror, showing a man who had learned to transform vulnerability into power, insecurity into magnetic confidence. The white tank top and jeans he wore seemed almost casual, but every detail had been carefully chosen. Tonight, like every night, he would give everything he had to those people waiting in the darkness beyond the stage lights. The band members moved through their own preparations with the precision of seasoned warriors. Brian May tuned his red special guitar with the methodical care of a surgeon, each string adjusted to perfection. Roger Taylor sat behind his drum kit, rolling his shoulders and flexing his fingers, preparing for the physical marathon ahead. John Deacon, ever the quiet professional, checked his bass guitar one final time, his calm presence anchoring the controlled chaos surrounding them. But something felt different tonight. Perhaps it was the weight of performing at Wembley, their home ground, where every note would be scrutinized by the most passionate fans in the world. Or maybe it was the knowledge that this tour represented Queen at their absolute peak. 4 musicians who had found that rare alchemy where individual talents merged into something greater than the sum of their parts. As the crew made final adjustments to the lighting rig and sound system, Freddie walked to the edge of the stage area, peering through a gap in the curtains at the sea of humanity beyond. The sight never failed to move him, even after all these years. Each face in that crowd represented a story, a life touched by the music he and his bandmates had created in studios and rehearsal rooms. They had come seeking escape, connection, and the kind of transcendent experience that only live music could provide. The stage manager approached with his clipboard, signaling that showtime was approaching. The familiar butterflies began their dance in Freddie's stomach, the same nervous energy that had accompanied him since Queen's earliest days playing small clubs. Success had never diminished that feeling. If anything, it had intensified it. The bigger the stage, the greater the responsibility to deliver something unforgettable. What none of them could have predicted was that tonight would indeed be unforgettable, but not for the reasons they expected. Hidden somewhere in that vast crowd was a young person whose presence would soon transform a routine concert into a moment of pure human connection that would ripple across the world. The stage was set, the crowd was ready, and Freddie Mercury was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful performances happen not when everything goes according to plan, but when the unexpected forces us to reveal who we truly are beneath the spotlight. The roar that erupted when Queen took the stage was unlike anything the seasoned crew had ever experienced. Even at Wembley, it was a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. 86,000 voices merging into a single, overwhelming expression of pure joy and anticipation. The stage lights blazed to life, transforming the stadium into a cathedral of rock and roll, with Freddie Mercury as its high priest. From the opening chords of One Vision, it was clear that this would be a night of musical magic. Freddie moved across the stage with the fluid grace of a dancer and the commanding presence of a general leading his troops into glorious battle. His voice, that incredible 4-octave instrument that had captivated the world, soared over the crowd with crystalline clarity. Every gesture was deliberate, every movement calculated to draw the audience deeper into the spell he was weaving. The crowd responded like a living organism, swaying and singing as one massive choir. In the front rows, faces were illuminated by the stage lights, showing expressions of pure ecstasy and wonder. These were the devoted fans who had arrived hours early, camping outside the venue to secure their positions as close as possible to their heroes. Behind them, the stadium stretched back in waves of humanity, each section adding its voice to the collective celebration. But in section 127, row KA, seat 15, something was wrong. 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell had been looking forward to this concert for months, saving every penny from her part-time job at the local record shop to afford the ticket. She had traveled down from Manchester with her older sister, both of them wearing homemade Queen t-shirts and carrying a banner they had spent weeks perfecting. This was supposed to be the greatest night of her young life. Instead, Sarah found herself struggling to breathe. The combination of the crushing crowd, the overwhelming heat generated by thousands of bodies pressed together, and her own excitement had triggered something she had never experienced before. Her vision began to blur, and the thunderous music that should have been lifting her spirits now seemed to press down on her like a physical weight. Her sister noticed first, seeing Sarah's face drain of color despite the warm summer evening. The girl's hands were trembling, and she was gripping the barrier in front of her with white knuckles, trying desperately to stay upright. Around them, the crowd continued to surge and sway, oblivious to the small drama unfolding in their midst. The security guards were focused on the stage, watching for crowd surfers and potential troublemakers, not scanning for medical emergencies in the middle of the packed sections. On stage, Queen was building toward the climax of their opening number, completely unaware of the crisis developing in the audience. Freddie was in his element, feeding off the energy of the crowd, his movements becoming more theatrical and dynamic with each passing moment. Brian's guitar work was flawless, each note ringing out with perfect clarity across the stadium. Roger's drumming provided the thunderous heartbeat that drove the music forward, while John's bass lines anchored everything with steady precision. The song reached its explosive finale, and as the last notes echoed across Wembley, Freddie raised his arms in triumph, acknowledging the deafening applause. But even as he basked in the adoration of the crowd, his performer's instincts were at work, scanning the sea of faces before him. Years of live performance had taught him to read an audience like a book, to sense the mood and energy of different sections of the venue. It was during this moment of connection between artist and audience that Freddie's eyes swept across section 127. For just an instant, his gaze lingered on a disturbance in the crowd, a small pocket of concern amid the celebration. Most performers would have missed it entirely, their attention focused on the broader spectacle. But Freddie Mercury had always possessed an unusual sensitivity to individual human moments, even in the midst of massive public performances. The transition between songs provided a brief moment of relative quiet, and it was in this space that Freddie's attention became fully focused on the disturbance he had glimpsed in the crowd. His years of performing had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the energy of an audience, to sense when something was amiss among the thousands of faces looking up at him. What he saw in section 127 made his performer's instincts shift into something deeper, more human. Sarah Mitchell was now visibly struggling, her breathing shallow and rapid as panic began to set in. The walls of people around her seemed to be closing in, and the noise that had initially thrilled her now felt overwhelming and suffocating. Her sister was trying to help, attempting to create space around Sarah, while simultaneously trying to catch the attention of security personnel who remained focused on other areas of the venue. The crowd's energy was building toward the next song, but Freddie found himself hesitating at the microphone. His bandmates looked at him expectantly, ready to launch into their carefully rehearsed setlist, but something in Freddie's posture had changed. The theatrical persona that commanded the stage was giving way to something more instinctive, more protective. From his elevated position, Freddie could see what the security team could not. A young person in genuine distress, surrounded by well-meaning but ultimately helpless fellow concert-goers. The situation was developing rapidly, and Freddie realized that without intervention, this could escalate into something serious. The irony was not lost on him, that in a venue filled with trained security personnel and medical staff, he might be the only person in a position to actually help. The decision formed in his mind with startling clarity. Everything he had learned about performance, about commanding attention and directing energy, could be applied to this moment. But instead of using those skills for entertainment, He would use them for something far more important. The 86,000 people who had come to see Queen perform were about to witness something unprecedented in rock concert history. Brian May noticed the change in Freddie's demeanor first, the way his friend's attention had shifted from the audience as a whole to a specific point in the crowd. Roger and John followed Brian's gaze, trying to understand what had captured their lead singer's focus so completely. The band had performed together for so many years that they could communicate almost telepathically on stage, and they sensed that something significant was about to happen. The crowd was beginning to grow restless, expecting the next song to begin. Scattered voices called out song requests, while others simply cheered in anticipation. But Freddie remained motionless at the microphone, his eyes fixed on section 127, calculating distances and possibilities. The stage was elevated significantly above the crowd level, and the barrier system was designed to prevent exactly what he was contemplating. Security personnel near the stage began to take notice of Freddie's unusual behavior. They followed his gaze toward the crowd, finally beginning to spot the disturbance that had captured his attention. But they were positioned incorrectly to respond quickly, and the crowd density made immediate intervention difficult. Standard protocol would involve slowly working through the packed sections, a process that could take several crucial minutes. Sarah's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The combination of heat, excitement, and crowd pressure had triggered a full panic attack, and she was now struggling to remain conscious. Her sister's attempts to help were limited by the physical constraints of their position. Surrounded on all sides by other concert-goers who were becoming aware of the situation but were equally powerless to provide meaningful assistance. It was at this moment that Freddie Mercury made a decision that would define not just this concert, but his entire legacy as a performer and human being. The man who had spent his career creating larger-than-life theatrical experiences was about to strip away all pretense and reveal the compassionate heart that had always driven his artistry. The stage, the lights, the carefully orchestrated spectacle, all of it was about to become secondary to a simple act of human kindness. Without warning or explanation, Freddie Mercury stepped away from the microphone and walked directly to the edge of the stage. The crowd's cheering began to fade into confused murmurs as they watched their idol move with purpose toward the barrier that separated performers from audience. His bandmates exchanged glances of bewilderment, unsure whether this was some new theatrical element they hadn't rehearsed or something entirely spontaneous. The security team near the stage moved into position, uncertain about Freddie's intentions, but ready to intervene if necessary. They had seen performers interact with crowds before, but never with this level of intensity and focus. Freddie's body language suggested he was preparing to do something that went far beyond the usual stage banter or crowd engagement that punctuated most rock concerts. In section 127, Sarah's sister had managed to attract the attention of nearby concert-goers who were now trying to create a small pocket of space around the struggling teenager. But their efforts were limited by the sheer density of the crowd and the fact that most people were still focused on the stage, unaware of the medical emergency developing in their midst. The situation required intervention from someone with real authority and the ability to command attention. Freddie reached the edge of the stage and, without hesitation, began to lower himself down toward the crowd. The action sent shockwaves through the venue as 86,000 people suddenly realized that their idol was leaving the safety and elevation of the performance area. Security personnel rushed forward, but Freddie's movement was so swift and decisive that they found themselves reacting rather than preventing. The crowd in the front sections pressed forward instinctively, reaching out toward Freddie as he descended. But instead of acknowledging their outstretched hands or playing to their excitement, he kept his focus locked on his destination. His years of stage experience had taught him how to move through crowds safely, how to use his presence to create space and direct energy where it was needed most. As Freddie made his way through the packed front sections, a path began to open before him. The crowd's initial excitement gave way to something deeper as they realized this was not a planned part of the show. There was something urgent and purposeful in Freddie's movement that commanded respect and cooperation. People instinctively stepped aside, creating a corridor that allowed him to move toward section 127. The journey through the crowd took on an almost surreal quality. Here was one of the world's biggest rock stars, abandoning his stage and his performance to wade through a sea of humanity on what appeared to be a rescue mission. Camera flashes erupted around him as fans tried to capture this unprecedented moment. But Freddie remained focused on his objective, his famous charisma now channeled into something far more important than entertainment. Sarah's condition had reached a critical point. Her breathing was becoming increasingly labored, and the panic attack was intensifying despite her sister's efforts to calm her. The heat and pressure of the crowd were making everything worse, and it was clear that she needed immediate assistance from someone with the authority to create real change in her situation. When Freddie finally reached section 127, the crowd around Sarah seemed to part naturally, as if his presence carried some kind of magnetic force that reorganized the space around him. The teenager looked up through her distress and found herself face to face with the very person she had come to see perform. But instead of the theatrical rock god she expected, she saw something much more powerful. A human being who had recognized her need and had chosen to help. The entire stadium had fallen into an unprecedented hush, 86,000 people holding their collective breath as they witnessed something that transcended music and performance. The silence that had fallen over Wembley Stadium was unlike anything in the venue's storied history. 86,000 people watched in absolute stillness as Freddie Mercury knelt beside Sarah Mitchell, his famous stage presence transformed into something infinitely more tender and immediate. The theatrical grandeur that typically defined his performances had given way to pure human compassion, and the effect was more powerful than any song he had ever sung. Freddie's approach to Sarah was gentle and deliberate, his movements slow and non-threatening as he assessed her condition. Years of dealing with his own anxiety and panic had given him an intuitive understanding of what she was experiencing. He could see the rapid breathing, the pale complexion, the look of terror in her eyes as the panic attack reached its peak. Without the need for medical training, he recognized the signs of someone whose body and mind were overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. The crowd around them had reorganized itself naturally, creating a protective circle that gave Sarah space to breathe while still allowing Freddie to work. Concert-goers who, moments before, had been strangers, were now united in their concern for this young fan, their collective energy shifting from excitement to protective care. The transformation was remarkable, showing how quickly a crowd could become a community when faced with genuine human need. Freddie began to use techniques he had learned from his own struggles with performance anxiety and the pressures of fame. He positioned himself so that Sarah could focus on his face rather than the overwhelming crowd around her, creating a small island of calm in the midst of chaos. His presence was steady and reassuring, projecting the kind of confidence that could anchor someone who was drowning in panic. The stadium's medical team had finally been alerted to the situation and was making their way through the crowd, but their progress was slow due to the density of people and the complex layout of the venue. Security personnel were also converging on the area, though they maintained a respectful distance, recognizing that Freddie's intervention was proving more effective than anything they could have provided. Sarah's breathing began to slow slightly as Freddie's calming influence took effect. The panic that had been building in her chest started to ease, replaced by a sense of safety that came from being in the presence of someone who clearly understood what she was going through. The irony was profound. She had come to this concert seeking escape and joy, and instead had found herself in crisis, only to be rescued by the very person she had come to see. The cameras that had been documenting the concert were now capturing something far more significant than a typical rock performance. News crews and fan photographers alike were recording a moment that would soon spread around the world, showing a side of celebrity that rarely emerged in public. This was not a publicity stunt or a calculated gesture. It was genuine human kindness displayed on the largest possible stage. Freddie's bandmates remained on stage, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and concern. They knew their friend well enough to understand that this was exactly the kind of person he was beneath the theatrical persona, but they had never seen him display it so publicly or dramatically. Brian, Roger, and John stood ready to support whatever decision Freddie made about how to proceed with the evening. The medical team finally reached the area, their professional equipment and training now available to supplement Freddie's instinctive care. But rather than stepping aside immediately, Freddie remained close to Sarah, understanding that his continued presence was providing psychological comfort that was just as important as any medical intervention. The combination of professional medical care and genuine human compassion was creating the optimal environment for Sarah's recovery. As the medical team worked alongside Freddie to stabilize Sarah's condition, something extraordinary began happening throughout the stadium. The 86,000 people who had come for a rock concert were witnessing something that transcended entertainment entirely. Word of what was happening spread through the crowd like ripples on water, with those who could see the situation describing it to those behind them, creating a chain of communication that reached every corner of Wembley. The atmosphere in the stadium had transformed completely. Where there had been the typical energy of a rock concert, excitement, anticipation, the desire for spectacle, there was now something deeper and more profound. The crowd had become a congregation, united not by music, but by their shared witness to an act of pure human kindness. Many people were openly weeping, moved by the sight of their idol abandoning his performance to help a fan in need. Sarah's breathing had stabilized significantly under the combined influence of Freddie's calming presence and the medical team's professional care. The oxygen mask they had provided was helping to regulate her breathing, while Freddie remained close enough that she could see his reassuring face whenever panic threatened to return. His famous eyes, which had captivated millions from stages around the world, were now focused entirely on providing comfort to one frightened teenager. The medical assessment revealed that Sarah was suffering from a severe panic attack exacerbated by dehydration and heat exhaustion. The combination of the summer heat, the crushing crowd, and her own overwhelming excitement had created a perfect storm of physical and psychological stress. But with proper care and a calmer environment, she would recover fully. The key was removing her from the situation that had triggered the crisis. Freddie made a decision that would become legendary in rock history. Rather than simply ensuring Sarah received medical attention and then returning to his performance, he chose to personally escort her to safety. With the help of security personnel, he began to guide her through the crowd toward the medical facilities beneath the stadium, his arm providing steady support as they moved slowly through the sea of people. The journey through the crowd became a procession unlike anything Wembley had ever seen. As Freddie and Sarah moved through the sections, people spontaneously began to applaud, not the wild cheering typical of a rock concert, but the respectful, emotional applause reserved for moments of genuine significance. Many fans reached out to touch Freddie's shoulder or simply to be near this unprecedented display of compassion. Camera crews from multiple news organizations were now documenting every moment of this extraordinary scene. What had begun as routine concert coverage was becoming something far more newsworthy, a story that would soon spread across international media and touch hearts around the world. The images being captured would become iconic, representing not just a moment in rock history, but a testament to the power of human kindness. As they reached the medical area beneath the stadium, Sarah's condition had improved dramatically. The combination of cooler air, reduced crowd pressure, and Freddie's continued presence had allowed her panic to subside almost completely. The medical staff confirmed that she was out of immediate danger and would make a full recovery with rest and continued hydration. But Freddie's care for Sarah didn't end with delivering her to medical professionals. He remained with her in the quiet medical facility, ensuring that she felt safe and supported as she recovered from her ordeal. The contrast was striking. Outside, 86,000 people waited for the concert to resume, while inside, one of the world's biggest rock stars sat quietly with a teenage fan, proving that sometimes the most important performances happen away from any stage. In the quiet medical facility beneath Wembley Stadium, a different kind of magic was taking place. Away from the lights and spectacle that defined his public persona, Freddie Mercury revealed the gentle soul that his closest friends had always known existed beneath the theatrical exterior. He sat beside Sarah's medical cot with the patience of a caring older brother, his presence providing a sense of security that no amount of professional medical care could have achieved alone. The medical staff worked efficiently around them, monitoring Sarah's vital signs and ensuring her complete recovery, but they too were moved by what they were witnessing. In their years of providing emergency care at major events, they had seen celebrities make brief appearances for publicity purposes, but never anything like this sustained. Genuine concern for a fan's well-being. Freddie's attention was entirely focused on Sarah's comfort, asking the medical team thoughtful questions about her condition and what could be done to prevent similar incidents. Meanwhile, above them in the stadium, an unprecedented situation was unfolding. The remaining members of Queen had taken the stage to address the crowd, explaining that Freddie was attending to a medical emergency and asking for everyone's patience and understanding. The response from the audience was immediate and overwhelming, a thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, expressing their collective approval of their hero's actions. The crowd's reaction revealed something profound about the relationship between performers and their audiences. These 86,000 people had paid significant money and traveled great distances to see Queen perform, yet they were unanimously supportive of Freddie's decision to prioritize human compassion over entertainment. Their response demonstrated that they understood they were witnessing something far more valuable than any concert could provide. News of the incident was already spreading beyond the stadium walls. Radio stations were interrupting their regular programming to report on the extraordinary scene at Wembley, while early mobile phone calls were carrying word of Freddie's actions to friends and family around the world. The story was taking on a life of its own, growing with each retelling as people struggled to convey the emotional impact of what they had witnessed. In the medical facility, Sarah had recovered enough to fully comprehend what had happened to her. The realization that Freddie Mercury had abandoned his performance to help her was almost overwhelming in itself, but his continued presence made it clear that this was not a publicity gesture or a brief moment of charity. This was genuine human caring, extended from one person to another without regard for status, fame, or the expectations of thousands of waiting fans. Freddie's own understanding of anxiety and panic made him uniquely qualified to help Sarah process what she had experienced. He shared his own strategies for managing overwhelming situations, speaking about the techniques he used to cope with the pressures of performing for massive audiences. His vulnerability in discussing his own struggles created a connection that went far beyond the typical relationship between celebrity and fan. The medical team confirmed that Sarah was fully recovered and could return to the concert if she wished, though they recommended she remain in a less crowded area for the rest of the evening. But Sarah's sister, who had been brought to the medical facility to be with her, expressed concern about returning to the intense environment that had triggered the crisis in the first place. It was then that Freddie made another decision that would become part of rock legend. Rather than simply ensuring Sarah's safety and returning to his performance, he arranged for her and her sister to watch the remainder of the concert from the side of the stage, where they would have the best view in the house while remaining in a controlled, safe environment. This gesture transformed what could have been a traumatic memory into something magical and unforgettable. When Freddie Mercury finally returned to the Wembley stage nearly an hour after leaving it, the roar that greeted him was unlike anything he had experienced in his entire career. This was not the typical excitement of fans seeing their idol. This was something deeper, more profound. The sound of 86,000 people expressing their love and respect for a human being who had shown them what true compassion looked like. The applause seemed to go on forever, washing over him in waves of pure emotion. From her privileged position at the side of the stage, Sarah watched in amazement as the man who had saved her transformed back into the theatrical legend the world knew. But now she understood that the persona and the person were not separate entities. They were different expressions of the same generous spirit. Freddie caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod, a private moment of connection that acknowledged their shared experience before he turned his full attention back to the crowd. The remainder of the concert took on an almost spiritual quality. Every song seemed infused with additional meaning. Every gesture from Freddie carried extra weight because the audience had seen behind the curtain of celebrity to witness genuine humanity. When he sang "We Are the Champions," the lyrics resonated differently, celebrating not just musical achievement, but the triumph of compassion over indifference, of human connection over commercial entertainment. The story of what had happened at Wembley that night spread across the globe with unprecedented speed. Newspapers around the world ran front-page stories about the rock star who stopped his show to save a fan. Television news programs led with footage of Freddie making his way through the crowd, the images becoming iconic representations of celebrity used for good rather than self-promotion. The incident transcended music journalism to become a human interest story that touched people who had never heard a Queen song. In the days and weeks that followed, Sarah found herself at the center of international media attention, but rather than feeling overwhelmed by the spotlight, she used her platform to speak about mental health awareness and the importance of recognizing panic attacks and anxiety disorders. Her experience had transformed from a personal crisis into a catalyst for broader conversations about psychological well-being, particularly among young people. Freddie himself rarely spoke publicly about the incident, deflecting praise and insisting that he had simply done what anyone would have done in the same situation. But those closest to him knew that the evening had affected him deeply, reinforcing his belief that fame and success were meaningless unless they were used to make a positive difference in the world. The incident became a defining moment in how he approached his remaining years in the spotlight. The concert footage from that night became some of the most treasured in Queen's extensive archive. But it was not the musical performances that made it special. It was the documentation of a moment when entertainment became secondary to human kindness. The images of Freddie in the crowd, kneeling beside Sarah, became as iconic as any of his stage performances, representing the man behind the legend. Years later, as Freddie faced his own health struggles, he would often reflect on that night at Wembley. The memory of helping Sarah served as a reminder of what truly mattered in life, not the applause or the accolades, but the connections we make with other human beings and the help we offer when it is needed most. In a career filled with spectacular moments, it was this quiet act of compassion that he considered among his greatest achievements. The legacy of that evening extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. It became a template for how public figures could use their influence responsibly, showing that true greatness lies not in commanding attention, but in knowing when to step away from the spotlight to help someone in need. Freddie Mercury had stopped the show to help a fan, and in doing so, he had moved the whole world. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming emotional and inspiring tales about Freddie's life and legacy. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and often your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.